In 1963, a man in central Turkey was renovating his basement. He wasn't an archaeologist. He wasn't searching for an ancient city. He was simply knocking through a wall inside his house. Then the wall gave way, and behind it was a passage. He followed it. The passage led to a room. The room led to another passage. Then stairs, going down, and down, and down. What started as a home renovation had opened into something much bigger. Derinkuyu, an underground complex carved into the soft volcanic rock of Cappadocia. As archaeologists cleared the passages, the scale became almost absurd. Multiple underground levels, living spaces, food storage, animal stables, work areas, religious spaces, wells, and ventilation shafts extending deep into the ground. Some estimates suggest the complex could have sheltered tens of thousands of people. But why would anyone build a city underground? The answer may have been survival. Cappadocia sits on volcanic tuff, rock soft enough to carve with relatively simple tools, but stable enough to form enormous underground spaces. And the builders had another trick. Huge circular stone doors could be rolled across narrow passages. From inside, if danger reached one level, people could seal it, then retreat deeper. And wait. The deeper archaeologists went, the more the underground system began to look less like a collection of caves, and more like a deliberately engineered refuge. But here's the mystery. We know later communities used Derinkuyu. We know early Christians used underground spaces in Cappadocia as places of refuge. We can date parts of the complex. But the full story of its earliest construction is much harder to reconstruct. Who first began carving these passages? And why did they keep going deeper? Because Derinkuyu wasn't simply hidden from the surface. It was designed to function without the surface. People needed air, water, food, storage, light, and a way to move through the city while staying underground. Think about the engineering required. A city above ground can spread outward. This one had nowhere to go, except down. And that creates a strange connection with the Maya. In the jungle, an entire city disappeared because vegetation covered it. Here, an entire underground world could disappear because nobody knew to look for it. But Turkey has another ancient site where the builders faced an even stranger problem. There was no forest to hide it, no mountain to bury it. They built their city on the WE. There is a place in the Pacific where the ground itself seems to disappear. Off the coast of Pohnpei, in the Federated States of Micronesia, an ancient city rises from a shallow lagoon. Its name is Nan Madol. But calling it a city doesn't quite capture what you're looking at. The site is made up of more than 100 artificial islets, connected by narrow tidal canals. And the buildings aren't made from small stones. They're built from enormous basalt columns. Some weigh many tons. The stones were stacked in alternating layers, creating walls and platforms that still stand above the water centuries later. And that's where the obvious question appears. How did they build this? The people who constructed Nan Madol didn't have modern cranes. They didn't have engines. They didn't have steel cables or trucks. So researchers have looked for practical explanations. Timber, rafts, levers, earthen ramps, human labor. The exact construction process remains debated, but experimental archaeology shows that ancient societies could move surprisingly heavy stones using simple technology when enough people, time, and organization were available. And that's the part that makes Nan Madol fascinating. Because moving one enormous stone is one problem. Building an entire monumental complex is another. Someone had to quarry the basalt. Someone had to transport it. Someone had to build the artificial platforms. Workers needed food. Materials had to arrive on schedule. The canals had to remain usable. And the construction had to continue for generations. This wasn't one giant engineering stunt. It was a system. Nan Madol became the ceremonial and political center of the Sodelur dynasty, which ruled Pohnpei for centuries. Temples stood here. Elite compounds stood here. Monumental tombs stood here. Power was concentrated on these tiny artificial islands surrounded by ocean. And suddenly, the mystery changes. The most interesting question isn't, how did they move the stones? It's, what kind of society could organize a project this enormous? Because just like the Maya landscape and the underground city of Derinkuyu, Nanmadol reveals something hidden behind the monuments. Organization, planning, and thousands of individual human decisions. But unlike the Amazon or the Maya cities, this place wasn't swallowed by a forest. It was slowly surrounded by the ocean. And thousands of miles away, another ancient city suffered an even more dramatic fate. It didn't disappear into the jungle. It didn't disappear underground. It disappeared beneath the Mediterranean. For centuries, historians knew a city called Thonis Heraclean existed. Ancient writers described it as one of Egypt's great ports. Ships entered the Nile Delta through its waters. Merchants passed through. Temples dominated the city. But there was a problem. Nobody could find it. There were no ruins on the modern coastline. No great walls. No obvious foundations. Nothing that looked like the remains of a major Egyptian port. Eventually, some scholars wondered whether the city had been exaggerated, or even confused with somewhere else. Then in 2000, underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team found something beneath the Bay of Abu Qir. The city. Not a few broken stones. An entire archaeological landscape lying beneath roughly 10 meters of water, about 7 kilometers from today's coastline. And the preservation was extraordinary. Massive statues, temple remains, stone blocks, harbor structures, anchors, coins, jewelry, and dozens of ancient ships. For more than 1,000 years, the city had been gone from the surface. But underwater, parts of it were still there. So what happened? Thonis Heraclean didn't simply get abandoned and disappear. Its location made it vulnerable to geological disaster. The western Nile Delta is built on thick layers of soft, waterlogged sediment. When major earthquakes struck, parts of that ground could lose their strength. Buildings that had been standing on solid-looking ground could suddenly begin to sink. At the same time, the region was slowly subsiding. Sea levels were changing. And over time the coastline itself shifted. The city went down. Sediment covered it. Then water covered the sediment. And eventually, the port became a legend. But here's the incredible part. The same process that destroyed Thonis Heraclean also helped preserve it. Sand and mud sealed objects away from the normal processes of decay and human disturbance. So when archaeologists finally reached the site, they weren't just finding ruins. They were finding snapshots. A statue where it fell. A harbor where ships once arrived. Objects left behind by people who had no idea they were about to become part of an archaeological site. And suddenly, the story connects back to Derinkuyu. One city survived by going down. Another went down because the ground beneath it failed. But both disappeared from the world above. And there is one more way an ancient civilization can vanish. Not underground. Not underwater. Not beneath a forest. Sometimes, another civilization simply builds over it. And that's exactly what happened before Rome became Rome. Another civilization controlled much of central Italy. The Etruscans. They built cities, roads, drainage systems, temples, tombs. They traded across the Mediterranean and developed sophisticated metalworking and engineering traditions. And then Rome expanded. The Etruscan cities were conquered. Their people were absorbed. Their territory became part of the growing Roman world. But something else happened. Rome didn't simply replace the Etruscans. It built on top of them. And in some places, older structures disappeared beneath later construction. Walk through modern Rome today, and you're standing on layer after layer of history. Roman streets, medieval buildings, Renaissance palaces, modern roads. But underneath those layers can be an even older world. One that belonged to people who lived here before the Roman Empire existed. And here's the strange part. We can actually read Etruscan writing. Their alphabet is largely understood. The problem is the language itself. We have thousands of inscriptions, but very few long texts that explain who these people were in their own words. So historians often have to reconstruct Etruscan life from archaeology and from the Romans who came after them. And the Romans themselves admitted that they borrowed from the Etruscans. Religious practices, rituals, engineering techniques, symbols of political authority, even elements of Roman architecture and public life. But as Rome grew more powerful, The Etruscans became less visible. Their cities declined. Their buildings were reused. Their monuments were buried beneath later settlements. Their language eventually disappeared from everyday life. And this creates a different kind of archaeological mystery. Dorinquia disappeared because it was hidden underground. Thonis Heraclean disappeared beneath the sea. The Maya cities disappeared beneath vegetation. The Etruscan world disappeared beneath history itself. But archaeology can sometimes pull that world back into the light. A wall beneath a modern street. A tomb outside an ancient city. A fragment of pottery. A forgotten inscription. Each one adds another piece. And sometimes the smallest object tells us more than a monument ever could. Because our final city isn't famous for a giant pyramid, or enormous walls, or a lost empire. It is famous because ordinary people left their homes almost exactly as they lived in them. And then, they vanished. On the northern edge of Scotland, where the Atlantic hits the Orkney Islands with brutal force, a storm once exposed something that had been hidden for thousands of years. It was 1850. A violent winter storm tore away part of the coastal sand. And beneath it, stone walls appeared. Not a castle. Not a monument. A village. Skara Brae. The settlement was already around 5,000 years old when the storm revealed it. But what makes Skara Brae extraordinary isn't simply its age. It's what the people left behind. Inside the houses were stone beds, shelves, storage compartments, central hearths, work areas, even covered passageways connecting some homes. The settlement was so well preserved that archaeologists could reconstruct surprisingly intimate details of daily life. These weren't people simply trying to survive in crude shelters. They were organizing homes, building furniture from stone, managing food, making tools, decorating objects, creating a community in one of the harshest environments in prehistoric Europe. And then, they left. There are no obvious signs that a battle destroyed the village. No burned houses. No mass grave. No clear evidence of a catastrophic attack. Instead, the settlement appears to have been abandoned sometime around 2500 BC. Exactly why remains uncertain. Climate? Environmental change? Coastal conditions? Social pressure? We don't know. But one detail makes the mystery strangely personal. Among the objects recovered from the settlement were small personal items, tools, beads, and everyday possessions. Things people normally take with them. So why were they left behind? Were the residents leaving gradually? Or did something force them to leave quickly? Archaeologists still debate the evidence. And that's important. Because archaeology doesn't always give us a dramatic answer. Sometimes it gives us a house, a hearth, a stone bed, and a question. Skara Brae connects back to everything we've seen. A rainforest hid a civilization. A jungle concealed a city. Rock hid another underground. The Pacific preserved a monumental complex. The Mediterranean swallowed a port. Rome buried an older world beneath its own. And here, sand covered an entire village. Different places. Different civilizations. Different disasters. But the same extraordinary pattern. Human beings built something. Time covered it. For most of human history, archaeology had one huge limitation. You could only discover what you could see. A wall sticking out of the ground. A broken statue. A tomb exposed by a storm. A farmer hitting something with a plow. If the forest covered it, it was invisible. If the desert buried it, invisible. If the ocean swallowed it, almost impossible to find. But that's changing. LiDAR can now strip away vegetation without cutting down a single tree. Satellite imagery can reveal patterns across enormous landscapes. Ground-penetrating radar can detect structures beneath soil. Magnetometry can reveal buried walls, roads, furnaces, and other features by detecting tiny changes in the ground. And underwater sonar can map landscapes that haven't seen sunlight for thousands of years. That's why the discoveries we've just seen may not be isolated surprises. They may be examples of a much bigger shift. We're moving from archaeology that asks, where is the monument? To archaeology that asks, what happened to the entire landscape? And that changes everything. Because a civilization doesn't leave behind just one pyramid. It leaves roads, homes, fields, water systems, workshops, burial grounds, trash, thousands of small traces that only become meaningful when you see them together. That's exactly what happened in the Amazon. The forest looked empty. LiDAR showed a human landscape. The Maya jungle looked endless. LiDAR revealed roads, settlements, agriculture, and monumental centers. Derinkuya looked like ordinary rock. A broken basement wall revealed an underground world. Thoni's Heraclean looked like a legend. A sonar survey revealed a city beneath the sea. Skara Brae looked like a patch of sand. A storm exposed homes frozen in time. And that creates a strange possibility. The most important ancient discovery of the next decade may not be sitting on a hill waiting for someone to notice it. It could be underneath a forest, beneath a modern city, under a desert, or on the ocean floor. We used to think lost civilizations disappeared because they were destroyed, but maybe that's only half the story. Sometimes, they didn't disappear. We simply lost the ability to see them. And if that's true, then the final mystery isn't about the cities we've already found. It's about the ones our technology hasn't revealed yet. Because somewhere beneath the surface, there may be another civilization waiting for the moment someone finally looks down.